offthecorner.net. You, of course, are watching the F.A.C.T Project. F.A.C.T, of course, is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African-Centered Thought. The goal here on the F.A.C.T Project is to convey some facts and some information to members of our community. We learned recently on Friday that we lost a great revolutionary freedom fighter, the great Assata Shakur. A lot of people may or may not be familiar with her story. I'm going to do my best to highlight some of it today. Assata Shakur, for those that don't know, was a member of the Black Panther Party, as well as a member of the Black Liberation Army, which is a group that we don't spend a lot of time on. I think someone needs to do a documentary. Someone needs to do something on the Black Liberation Army. Before we do get into that, though, I want to give a shout out to DJ Tiger. We are, of course, doing this on the DJ Tiger platform. And for those of you who are followers of DJ Tiger, I would say definitely check out the mix he did last night. Samples only mix with DJ Tiger. That was incredible. When you're done watching the F.A.C.T Project, I would say go and watch that if you haven't seen it. I'm going to probably play it again myself as soon as I'm done. Either way, shout out to DJ Tiger. Assata Shakur, like I said, was a member of the Black Panther Party, as well as a member of the Black Liberation Army. And it was considered to be an activist that came out of the Black Power movement. Put an A for Assata in the chat if you're familiar with the great Queen Mother Assata Shakur. Put an A in the chat if you're familiar with Queen Mother Assata Shakur. Because she was a member of the Black Panther Party, as well as the Black Liberation Army, she struggled a lot with surveillance under the counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO, of the FBI. And in 1973, she was in an incident on the New Jersey Turnpike that ended in the death of a New Jersey state trooper. Queen Mother Assata Shakur was falsely accused of that murder and was sentenced to prison in 1977. Subsequent to 1977 and 1979, with the help of the Black Liberation Army, Queen Mother Assata Shakur escaped from prison. I'm not sure how she did that. I read her book, by the way. She wrote a book. It's called Assata, an autobiography. She didn't go into detail on how the prison escape happened, but she did escape from prison in 1979, where she went to live in Cuba in exile. We're going to come back to Cuba in a minute, but I'm going to try to share my screen if I could. I want to show some footage of the great Queen Mother Assata Shakur speaking herself in her own words. I think this is important. Just stay with me. We're going to hear from Queen Mother Assata Shakur herself on the ground in Cuba. In this particular clip, she is talking about a vision that her grandmother had. Listen.
The first person that gave me the inner strength that I needed to overcome, or to be able to think about overcoming the tremendous odds that were against me, was my grandmother. She came from Wilmington, North Carolina, to see me at Yardville Prison. I was in that prison. I was put in a maximum security unit, in a cell with 2 guards in front of the cell 24 hours a day and a cell between two gun towers that could train their guns directly on the cell. I was told that I was in the Yardville unit for women, even though I was the only woman. And they tried to keep me there for the rest of my life. My grandmother came to visit me there to tell me a dream. And she came with all of my family, and everybody was happy. And I'm like, what's happening with y'all? And this, no, she had a dream. And I was like, okay. And so my grandmother's dream was that she was dressing me, that she was in an old house that she lived in when she lived in New York still. And she was putting clothes on me. I said, is that the dream? She said, that's the dream. And I said, well, was I little or big? She said, no, you were big. So I said, oh my God, the only time people dress anybody when they're grown is when they're dead. And so she said, no, I know what you're thinking. No. What this dream means is that you are going to leave this prison. I don't know when, but it's going to be much less time than you've already spent here. And, I didn't understand the dream, to be honest. It didn't make any sense to me. What does this have and wearing clothes have to do with getting out of prison? But my grandmother has always had dreams, and her dreams have always come true.
Okay, that is the great mother, Queen Mother Assata Shakur, talking about a dream that her grandmother had while she was incarcerated. And that story there is coming from a documentary called Eyes of the Rainbow. I would recommend everybody go watch that. If you haven't seen it, definitely go and check out Eyes of the Rainbow. It's a full documentary on the life of Queen Mother Assata Shakur. Plenty of great footage of her in Cuba, walking around as a free person, and did her interviews and so forth. So if anybody wants to hear from her directly, I would say definitely go and check out Eyes of the Rainbow. Now I'm trying to do my next thing here. Forgive me for doing this on the fly. Queen Mother Assata Shakur was a political prisoner, much like the great Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is, by the way, still incarcerated. We are looking forward to his freedom. And I'm having a tough time here. So everybody just bear with me. I'm on part 2. Put an A in the chat if you're familiar with the great Queen Mother Assata Shakur. It looks like Ms. Cooley in the chat is familiar with it. She put that in the chat. I appreciate that. Just stay with me. This is not what I wanted. Part 1 is what I wanted. So Queen Mother Assata Shakur, in her own words, she said, "It is our duty to fight for freedom. And it is our duty to win." One of my favorite quotes from the great Queen Mother Assata Shakur, coming from her book, Assata, which we're going to talk more about that in a minute. All right, having a tough time here. Here we go. This is not the one I wanted. Okay, here we go. This is the one that I wanted. This is coming from NBC in New York City, I believe this was, Channel 4. They had did a piece on Queen Mother Assata Shakur. And it's in 2 parts, which is probably why I'm struggling with it now, because I'm trying to get it together on the fly. But here we go. This is a piece that was done on Queen Mother Assata Shakur on NBC News. Listen.
She is a heroine to some. As a fighter for black rights, she is a villain to others who believe she hides her crimes behind revolutionary rhetoric. Back in the 1970s, Assata Shakur was known as the soul of the self-styled Black Liberation Army, an armed group implicated in the killings of several police officers. In New Jersey, Governor Whitman has posted a $50,000 reward for her capture.
That was Governor Christy Todd Whitman. Listen.
Meet her now in Cuba. As she walks through Havana streets, she is just another shopper. She passes almost unnoticed by Cubans. Her name is Assata Shakur. In the United States, she is known by the police and FBI as Joanne Chesimard, one of the nation's most wanted fugitives. Wanted for what police describe as the cold-blooded execution of a New Jersey state trooper back in the 70s. She denies it and says of the state cops,
They want to just kill me. They want to see me dead.
Chesimard was convicted in the killing of Trooper Werner Foster and the wounding of another trooper in a furious shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike in East Brunswick. That's where Chesimard was wounded, and one of two men in the car with her was killed. The other later captured. Police say that after Trooper Forrester was shot down, his own gun was ripped from his holster and 2 bullets were fired into his brain. After her capture in that deadly shootout, she was sentenced to life in prison. In 1979, with the help of 3 armed men, she broke out of the women's prison in Clinton, New Jersey.
She made her break this afternoon from the prison in Clinton, New Jersey, and lawmen once called her the soul of the Black Liberation Army.
Chesimard went underground and then surfaced in the 1980s in Cuba under Fidel Castro's protection. Now, at 50 and a grandmother, she agreed to talk with me in Havana. Chesimard, or Assata Shakur, insisted she had killed no one and was railroaded by an all-white jury and by what she called racist New Jersey state troopers.
Did you shoot Werner Foster?
No, I did not. I was shot with my arms in the air, then shot again in the back, and then left on the ground to die.
That is absolutely false. Our investigation shows that Joanne Chesimard initiated the conflict. She reached into her pocketbook, pulled out a 9mm weapon, and started firing at Trooper Harper.
Were you holding a weapon?
No, I was not. No.
Well, after almost 25 years, the roadway area has changed somewhat, but this is the spot where the shooting occurred. Joanne Chesimard was in the front seat on the passenger side. The driver of the car and Trooper Forrester were in the back of the car. It was after midnight, and shots rang out.
Harper, who was the other police
Correct.
that was at the
The
scene,
other trooper
started to shoot. And, you know, after that, everything is like foggy. It was horrible. It was like a prolonged version of hell. You know, I felt like, you know, everything was moving around. My chest started to explode. My head started to explode. And the next thing I knew, you know, they were coming by me and saying, "Is she dead yet? Is she dead yet?" And I was later taken to a hospital, and I was beaten. I was tortured.
I think that you know, as so happens so often with the criminal element, they have a tendency to turn things around, and they become the victim. We got to remember that, number one, there's a trooper who is dead.
And why did Assata Shakur escape from prison using hostages as a shield instead of appealing her case to higher courts?
I never received justice. And I escaped, A, because I was afraid for my life, and B, because I knew that I would never receive justice.
As to Chesimard's claim that she was left on the ground to die, Colonel Williams told me she and her Confederate actually sped away in their car 5 miles down the turnpike before she was finally captured, and that it was Trooper Forrester who was left on the ground to die. The Clinton, New Jersey prison from which Chesimard escaped has been rebuilt with much tighter security.
NBC News fans, thanks.
All right, I'm going to stop that there. They're claiming that Queen Mother Assata Shakur shot the New Jersey State Trooper on the New Jersey Turnpike, which could not have possibly occurred because Queen Mother Assata Shakur was shot in the shoulder, in the back, actually. And according to forensics, there's no way she could have lifted her arm to shoot a gun at anybody. So it was not physically possible for her to even hold a gun, let alone raise her right arm to shoot a gun. Not only that, they never tested her hand for gunpowder residue when she was in the hospital. So there's a lot of reasonable doubt here to think that Queen Mother Assata Shakur had nothing to do with the murder of the New Jersey State Trooper. Now, a lot of people have said that the state trooper that was shot by another state trooper in friendly fire, is what they call it. And they tried to pin that on Queen Mother Assata Shakur with absolutely no real evidence to validate that claim, especially since they never tested her hands. The proper investigation was never really done. And so there's reasonable doubt to think that Queen Mother Assata Shakur had nothing to do with the murder of the state trooper. She was there. She was an incident. There was some gunfire. But she was not the one that shot and killed the state trooper. So Queen Mother Assata Shakur was wrongfully convicted of murder, which is why she escaped, which is why she gets the support that she has gotten from us since. Now, this is from the same NBC News piece. This is part 2. Listen.
You're going to see 2 messages tonight to Joanne Chesimard. One from the widow of the New Jersey State Trooper Chesimard was convicted of killing some 20 years ago, a murder Chesimard denies. The other message is from the New Jersey State Police. And in my exclusive interview with her, Chesimard expressed her fears of what the troopers just might do.
I'm afraid that they might assassinate me. They might try to kidnap me.
Joanne Chesimard, who calls herself Assata Shakur, talking to me in Havana, Cuba, talking of her fears that the New Jersey State Police will somehow find a way to get to her.
Now, you have to understand, Queen Mother Assata Shakur was a member of the Black Panther Party. FBI under J. Edgar Hoover considered the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to national security. So when she says she was feared for her life and she feared that they wanted to kill her, it's because she was involved with not only the Black Panther Party, but the Black Liberation Army. Listen.
These people will stop at nothing.
In 1979, Shakur escaped from a New Jersey prison where she was serving life for the murder of State Trooper Werner Forrester. Police said he was executed with his own gun.
It was such an...
Now, when they say he was executed with his own gun, this is where people say that the police, another state trooper, accidentally shot him, which is why the gun matches, because they carry the same gun. Listen.
Unfair trial, such by an all-white jury.
Joanne Chesimard is the #1 fugitive for the New Jersey State Police.
The head of the state police intently watched a tape of my interview with the convicted cop killer as she claimed state troopers tortured her in the hospital.
You know, they would stick their hands in the wounds. Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here?
It's been almost 25 years, and I'm sure that she's replayed this and turned it around to her benefit many, many times.
Now, the interesting thing, police, state trooper, law enforcement, whatever they call themselves, they're always giving you the police version of the story, which is not necessarily always true. Not only that, they're giving you what the media tells you is the police version of the story. Listen.
Shakur portrayed herself as a fighter for racial justice by what she called armed struggle if necessary.
People have the right to free themselves from oppression by whatever means they deem possible.
She is not a heroine. She's a murderer.
Colonel Williams called Shakur's fears of police assassination ludicrous, but then he gave me this startling comment.
We would do everything we could to get her off the island of Cuba, and if that includes kidnapping, we would do it.
This man said he would kidnap a free individual. Listen.
Colonel Williams told me the police determination to recapture Chesimard is fired by the memory of Trooper Forrester on the memorial wall.
She killed my husband.
Rose Forrester, the trooper's widow. Their son was just 3.5 years old when her husband was gunned down.
My son lost his dad. He grew up without a dad. You know, he never saw his son going to school. To for a soccer game, taking him fishing. And then he got married a year and a half ago. He never saw him getting married. And I think my son really missed to have a dad.
I say to her that I am totally sorry that Her husband was killed. I did not kill him.
She is sorry? I doubt it that she is sorry. No. I think they knew that what they were doing that night.
Again, accepting the police version of the story. Listen.
Anyone who suffers a loss is in great pain. And I hope that she understands my pain as well.
She don't know what suffering is.
As for Colonel Williams' statement to me that he was prepared to kidnap Joanne Chesimard from Cuba, later in the interview, he said that only lawful actions would be taken, but he didn't elaborate.
Yeah.
The top state police official added that even now, almost 2 decades after her prison escape, he has a detective working full-time on the Chesimard case. Williams told me, and I'm quoting, Chesimard better be looking over her shoulder all the time.
Okay, so FBI obviously never caught up with Queen Mother Assata Shakur, and she made her transition on the island of Cuba as a free woman. Now, FBI had put a $1 million bounty on the head of Queen Mother Assata Shakur, and I believe, if I remember right, she was the first woman to be placed on the FBI's most wanted list. The bounty was $1 million. And which makes no sense. They said if you could travel to Cuba and you can get a hold of Queen Mother Assata Shakur, you can extradite her back to the United States. A person couldn't travel to Cuba because of the economic embargo that America has had against Cuba for 60 plus years. So you couldn't travel to Cuba anyway. So the idea that, someone can go to Cuba and get this $1 million bounty for Queen Mother Assata Shakur is absurd at best, which is probably why it never happened. Now, the interesting thing, President Barack Obama, our nation's first Black president, he increased the bounty on the head of Queen Mother Assata Shakur from $1 million to $2 million. This is our Black president. Increased the bounty on the head of a woman who was wrongly convicted of a murder she did not commit. He raised the bounty from $1 million to $2 million. Now, the interesting thing is when Barack Obama went to Cuba and he was trying to lift the economic embargo with Cuba and open the gates so America can begin to do business with Cuba again, he met with Raul Castro, who was the president of Cuba at the time. And Barack Obama mentioned Assata Shakur and how they would like to get their hands on her and bring her back to the United States so she can serve her sentence in prison. Raul Castro told Obama that Assata Shakur is not a point of discussion. In other words, he told Barack Obama to kick rocks. We're not going to let you get your hands on Assata Shakur. And they didn't. And so I think it's interesting that Assata Shakur, we revere her as a freedom fighter, a revolutionary, and a hero. She was on the FBI most wanted list for the duration of her life at this point. I think it's interesting we see Nelson Mandela as a freedom fighter. He fought systemic white supremacy and apartheid in South Africa. He spent 27 years in prison fighting for to eliminate systemic white supremacy in South Africa. He was released from prison after 27 years. He became the president of South Africa. This is to show you how backwards FBI is. Nelson Mandela was on the FBI terrorist list up until 2007. This man had been president of a nation already, elected by the people, and was still on the FBI terrorist list all the way up until all the way up until 2007. Now, Queen Mother Assata Shakur has been very influential, especially on Generation X. And not only did we revere her as a hero and someone that resisted systemic white supremacy, she was also mentioned in our music. Now, in the 80s, rap music was not what it is now. Wasn't this "I'm gonna kill me another black person" nonsense that they're doing right now. I did a whole piece on this called The History of Conscious Rap, Part 3. why I talked about Rebel Without a Pause and the fact that they mentioned Queen Mother Assata Shakur, who was born, by the way, Joanne Deborah Byron. She was married, which is where her name Chesimard comes from. And she was known publicly as Joanne Chesimard. She changed her name to Assata Shakur. Interesting thing, Chuck D on Rebel Without a Pause mentioned Assata Shakur, but he referred to her as Chesimard, which is what the system would call her. Listen. Recorded and ordered, supporter of Chesimard. Supporter of Chesimard. This is what we're listening to in our music in the 80s. It wasn't the nonsense that we have now. She was also very influential on groups like Dead Prez, who mentioned her in song. I know Killer Mike actually mentioned Assata Shakur in one of his records. Common, and I believe it was on his Like Water for Chocolate album, he did a whole song about Assata. It's called Song for Assata. Great record. I would play it now, but I'm not going to be able to play the whole song. That gets into a whole nother conversation. But either way, not only was Queen Mother Assata Shakur memorialized on record by rappers, but she was also the face of Black August, which was a series of music concerts to honor and salute our freedom fighters and our political prisoners. Put an A in the chat if you're familiar with Black August and what that is. Assata Shakur's image was like the logo of Black August. And on the bill with Black August, and they did this every year for years, you would have artists like Dead Prez, Common. I even seen David Banner from Mississippi perform on Black August. Most Def. This was a concert series that was done to raise awareness about our revolutionary freedom fighters, some of whom were political prisoners. Put an A in the chat for Queen Mother Assata if you remember the Black August concert series. Not only that, still making this connection between Assata Shakur and hip hop music, Assata Shakur was actually the godmother of Tupac Shakur. Assata Shakur and F.A.C.T Shakur, Tupac's mother, were good friends. And so F.A.C.T Shakur made Assata Shakur Tupac's godmother. So there's that connection between Queen Mother Assata Shakur and the hip hop movement, especially Generation X. The now generation, they don't listen to our music, so they're not listening to Public Enemy. They may not be hearing the name Assata, which was mentioned by Dead Prez, which was mentioned by Common, which a lot of artists, Killer Mike, so forth, mentioned. They might not be hearing those songs because they're not talking about those sort of revolutionary things in their music in the modern day. They need to, and they need to know this history. They need to go back and listen to Public Enemy. They need to go back and listen to Dead Prez. They need to go back and read Queen Mother Assata Shakur's autobiography. And Hassan Burton in the chat said that is a must read. And I have to respectfully agree with that. That is definitely a must read. I think that is mandatory reading and required reading for all Black people. Every Black family should have Assata's book in their home so that we can teach the children and the next generation what it looks like to resist the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. I mentioned Black August. And not only that, I think it's interesting that Queen Mother Assata Shakur made her transition in this year, 2025, which is the 100th birth anniversary of the great Omawali Malcolm X. 2025 also happens to be the 100-year birth anniversary of Patrice Lumumba. 2025 also happens to be the 100th birth anniversary of Medgar Evers. And 2025 also happens to be the 100th birth anniversary of Robert F. Williams. There's a documentary on Robert F. Williams. For those of you that may or may not know who he is, I would recommend that as well. We talk about the Black Panther Party, who was adamant about self-defense and defending themselves. And I say in my book, the 6 jewels of self-sufficiency are food, clothes, shelter, education, medication, and self-defense. self-defense piece is very important. So definitely big up to Robert F. Williams, who I think everybody should definitely go and do the research and learn who Robert F. Williams is. But today we're talking about Queen Mother Assata Shakur. And I want to big up everybody in the chat that's chiming in. I'm not going to be too long-winded today. I wanted to do this to make sure that the Fact Project added a layer to the story of Queen Mother Assata Shakur. Hassan Burton in the chat says, I read Assata Shakur's book, and she stated Afeni and her were incarcerated together. And Afeni was pregnant. Interesting. Yeah, the story goes a lot deeper. I thank Hassan Burton for mentioning that, because it's a lot more than I'm saying right now. Again, I would recommend everybody read that book. I'm waiting for somebody to make a movie. I believe there was a movie about Assata Shakur, but it was not a big budget movie. Either way, if that's online, I would recommend people go check that out. I'm gonna end today. Let me see if I could read some of these comments that people have been making in the chat. I want to big up everybody in the chat. It says, let me see, not Pick Me 47 said Assata, an autobiography and Eyes of the Rainbow documentary. Those are two things that you definitely want to see. So we want to thank them for mentioning that. Of course, we got Hassan Burton in the chat as always, chiming in, always adding a log to the file. We got Ms. Cooley, who's always adding another layer. I want to salute everybody that chimed in the chat. Ms. Cooley said, are you serious? That's insane. Yes. And Hassan Burton in the chat said Castro wasn't having it. And Barack Obama, he says Barry, not Barack, is not like us. Yeah, definitely not like us. That's a whole nother conversation. I don't want to get into that. Nada Pick Me 47 mentioned Mumia Abu-Jamal, who I think is another political prisoner who was wrongfully convicted of killing a police officer, who's still serving time in prison. I mentioned recently that Mumia Abu-Jamal was having another health issue with his vision. And we were trying to raise awareness for that. I gave out the phone numbers for people to call the prison and call all of those people in charge of handling Mumia's situation. Told everyone to call those numbers and encourage them to allow Mumia to get the surgery that he needed. Now, I probably shouldn't say this because I don't know for sure, but I'm hearing some talk that says Mumia received the eye surgery that he needed to rectify his situation with his vision. I don't know that for sure, so I probably shouldn't say that, but this is what I'm hearing. So Hannibal Maurer, I'm not sure how you say that, says, I was fortunate enough to have a professor who assigned me her book for class to read at VCU in 1989. In 1989, that book was really hot. Now, you had a college professor that directed you to read that. I think that's interesting. Hassan Burton in the chat said Mandela was free and made president at the expense of Winnie Mandela. Okay, so the story of Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, another show altogether. Either way, I'm going to see if I could go to the words of Queen Mother Assata Shakur herself. This is a open letter that she wrote to the Pope of the Catholic Church, who had made a trip over to Cuba. Not sure if he ever got a chance to read Assata Shakur's letter or not, but these are the words of Queen Mother Assata Shakur. I'm just trying to read in the chat. It says, Hannibal in the chat said, hip hop taught us of, it said, hip hop taught us of, I think it might be a typo. Hip hop taught us all, tried to teach us, or try to teach each other. I remember when that took a turn. So I guess he's talking about the downturn that hip hop made at some point. But in our rap music, we were talking about Assata Shakur. We talked about Malcolm X. We were talking about Marcus Garvey. This is the late 80s going into the early 90s. Hassan Burton in the chat says, I read Assata's biography. It's a must read. I read it 10 times, he said. Just as good as Malcolm X's autobiography. Yes, it's definitely on par with Malcolm X's autobiography. If you read only 2 autobiographies in your life, I would say read the autobiography of Malcolm X and Assata's autobiography, which is called Assata, an autobiography. Hannibal in the chat says the 80s was a different time. I remember watching every episode of Eyes on the Prize on PBS. Eyes on the Prize, I think, is another must. Eyes on the Prize is so profound that I actually got my own copy of it. And yeah, it's pricey online. That's all I'm going to say. It says, Hassan in the chat said, I read Assata's book, and she stated a fainting her. Okay, so I read that. It says, Knowledge 360. It says, long live Assata Ogbubala Shakur. And I think that might be it for the chat. It says, we appreciate you for being here and giving us right knowledge. That was Miss Cooley in the chat, who's always on the check-in. I appreciate everybody that checks in regular. And Hassan Burton said, Mumia is still kicking. Yes, he is. Mumia is still alive. Everyone that buried him alive got him incarcerated, done passed on. Became fertilized. That's funny. Cheryl Huda says Assata was an abnormality, I guess. Unlike the history told. Yeah, Assata Shakur was definitely something else. So now she was an exception because of her political education, her cultural education, her time that she spent in the Black Panther Party, the time she spent in the Black Liberation Movement. She talked about going to college. She went to BMCC, which is Borough of Manhattan Community College, in the early 1970s. And she, in her own words, talked about the consciousness that she encountered on campus and, the different organizations that there was to join. This was the height of the Black Power movement. And so she got a lot of her cultural education, a lot of her political education, a lot of her revolutionary spirit from being in college at that time and joining certain organizations. Now, this is Assata Shakur's open letter to the Pope, which was written, I believe this was 1990 something. And Assata Shakur in her biography, it's not just a biography about her life. She also manifests the concept of Kuumba, which is creativity, and added some poetry that she wrote to her book. And I quoted this earlier in one of her poems. She said, it is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. That for me that's a t-shirt. Either way, these are more words of the great Assata Shakur. And she's reading this herself. So you're going to actually hear her voice reading her own words. Listen.
My name is Assata Shakur, and I was born and raised in the United States. I am a descendant of Africans who were kidnapped and brought to the Americas as slaves. I spent my early childhood in the racist segregated South. I later moved to the northern part of the country where I realized that Black people were equally victimized by racism and oppression. I grew up and became a political activist, participating in student struggles, the anti-war movement, and most of all, in the movement for the liberation of African Americans in the United States. I later joined the Black Panther Party, an organization that was targeted by the COINTELPRO program, a program that was set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to eliminate all political opposition to the U.S. government's policies, to destroy the Black liberation movement in the United States, to discredit activists, and to eliminate potential leaders. Under the COINTELPRO program, many political activists were harassed, imprisoned, murdered, or otherwise neutralized. As a result of being targeted by COINTELPRO, I, like many other young people, was faced with the threat of prison, underground, exile, or death. The FBI, with the help of local police agencies, systematically fed false accusations and fake news articles to the press, accusing me and other activists of crimes we did not commit. Although in my case, the charges were eventually dropped or I was eventually acquitted, the national and local police agencies created a situation where, based on their false accusations against me, any police officer could shoot me on sight. It was not until the Freedom of Information Act was passed in the mid-'70s that we began to see the scope of the United States government's persecution of political activists. At this point, I think that it is important to make one thing very clear. I have advocated, and I still advocate, revolutionary changes in the structure and in the principles that govern the United States. I advocate self-determination for my people and for all oppressed people inside the United States. I advocate an end to capitalist exploitation, the abolition of racist policies, the eradication of sexism, and the elimination of political repression. If that is a crime, then I am totally guilty. To make a long story short, I was captured in New Jersey in 1973 after being shot with both arms held in the air and then shot again from the back. I was left on the ground to die, and when I did not, I was taken to a local hospital where I was threatened, beaten, and tortured. In 1977, I was convicted in a trial that can only be described as a legal lynching. In 1979, I was able to escape with the aid of some of my fellow comrades. I saw this as a necessary step, not only because I was innocent of the charges against me, but because I knew that the racist legal system in the United States, I would receive no justice. I was also afraid that I would be murdered in prison. I later arrived in Cuba, where I am currently living in exile as a political refugee. The New Jersey State Police and other law enforcement officials say they want to see me brought to justice. But I would like to know what they mean by justice. Is torture justice? I was kept in solitary confinement for more than 2 years, mostly in men's prisons. Is that justice? My lawyers were threatened with imprisonment and imprisoned. Is that justice? I was tried by an all-white jury without even the pretext of impartiality and then sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years. Is that justice? Let me emphasize that justice for me is not the issue I am addressing here. It is justice for my people that is at stake. When my people receive justice, I am sure that I will receive it too.
That is an excerpt of a letter Assata Shakur read, an open letter to Pope John Paul II during his trip to Cuba in 1998.
Okay, that was the words of Queen Mother Assata Shakur back in 1998. I like the fact that she says she's fighting for justice, not just for herself, not thinking as an individual, but fighting for justice for her people and fighting for justice, period, for all people. While in exile in Cuba, she wrote her book. And I said it required reading. Hassan Burton in the chat said, reading Assata's autobiography, you get the Black woman's perspective, which is very important to note, because as a member of the Black Panther Party, you don't get, when you hear the history, you don't get the female perspective on the, the fervor and the ego and the attitude and some of the, male dominant kind of thinking that was going on in the Black Panther Party. That's one thing I noticed when I read Assata Shakur's book, getting a more nuanced, detailed inside look into what the Black Panther Party was. It wasn't perfect. There are no perfect organizations because there are no perfect people. But Brother Hassan Burton makes a good point. He said, you get the woman's perspective. He said, reading Malcolm X's autobiography, you get the black man's perspective. So he said, reading Assata's book, you get the black woman's perspective. Reading Malcolm X's book, you get the black man's perspective. That is on point. That is right and exact. And in our culture as African people, we've always dealt with this concept of duality. It was always male and female. There's always that balance. The Chinese call it yin and yang. That's actually an idea they got out of Africa. They're not going to give us that credit, but they got that out of Africa. Now, the great Dr. Uhuru Hotep, who I've had as a guest here on this program, he worked at Duquesne University in the state of Pennsylvania. He said, if you're black in America, you're one of two things. You're either an integrationist, assimilationist, or you're a Pan-African black nationalist. I kind of had to wrestle with that for a minute. I don't want to say I didn't accept it, but I had to think about that. And he's actually right. The integration movement was the Urban League, the NAACP, right? The civil rights movement. They were saying that freedom for black people meant integrating with our oppressor, with our enemy. On the other side of that coin, you had the independence movement. These were people like Martin Delany, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X. They said, we need to bring about an independent reality for ourselves as people of African heritage and not try to integrate, because integrating with your enemy is not freedom. So ultimately, Dr. Uhuru Hotep was right. He said, if you're black in America, you're either an integrationist, assimilationist, or you're a Pan-African black nationalist, and you're a revolutionary and freedom fighter. That was Queen Mother Assata Shakur. She was a revolutionary. She was a freedom fighter. Now, the great Omowale Malcolm X once said, and I said it here before, I think it's worth repeating. He said, the 1/10 is our enemy. Put an A in the chat if you know who the 1/10 is. If you study the teachings of the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, you know who the 1/10 is. But the great Malcolm X once said, the 1/10 is our enemy. He said, many of us don't think so, but time will tell. I think history tells us that the 1/10 is our enemy, but the operative idea there is enemy. The great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, in her book, The ISIS Papers, another book that is required reading. In her book, The ISIS Papers, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said, racism is war on black people. So now you got two operative ideas, enemy and war. And I say, if we don't understand our situation in the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy, if we don't understand our situation in that system, within the context of warfare, we will never be able to transform our condition. Not only that, the great Neely Fuller Jr., in his book, The Code, he said, as the number one victims of systemic white supremacy, our goal should be to eliminate that system and replace it with a system of justice. Circling back to the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, she said, if you're not doing your part to fight the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy, you're basically just trying to get a more comfortable seat in that system. I'm saying all of that to say the great Queen Mother Assata Shakur was not trying to get a more comfortable seat in the system of structural racism. She was trying to eliminate that system and replace it with a system of justice. I would advise everybody, if you could, go back and listen to that open letter that she that she wrote to the Pope. Listen to what she's saying. She actually is talking a lot about some of the things that I'm trying to expound on now as it relates to fighting oppression. Mumia Abu Jamal, another political prisoner, he said, oppression is not normal. Oppression is not natural. Therefore, it's right to fight oppression. And I'm saying that because I think that Queen Mother Assata Shakur is an exceptional example of what it looks like to fight systemic white supremacy and actually win. You know, she's a great example of resistance. She won insofar as she escaped from captivity and she lived out the rest of her life as a free woman. This is why they're trying to take our history from us. They don't want us to know these sorts of things because they don't want us to have that kind of revolutionary mentality, thinking that we can eliminate the system. The 1/10 is just that, 1/10 of the population of the planet. I don't see why we can't. I don't see why we think we cannot eliminate the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. And if you think we can't, then guess what? You also believe in white supremacy. You also believe the myth of white supremacy if you think that it cannot be eliminated. I'm trying to go to Eyes of the Rainbow, see if we can go out with some of that. I want to thank everybody again for joining in the chat. I'm about to get off, but I want to go to a little bit more of our great revolutionary example, Queen Mother Assata Shakur. I think it's a story that needs to be told. I think it's everybody needs to read that book. If you don't have it, I would say definitely make it your job to go and get that book. Let's see if we can go to some words from the great Queen Mother Assata Shakur. You want to say rest in power. She is now an ancestor. And when Kwanzaa time comes around and you're pouring libation, be sure to mention her name. Okay, here we go. Stay with me, doing this on the flies. Queen Mother Assata Shakur.
I was born in 1947 in New York City. I lived with my mother and my aunt and my grandparents in a house in Queens, New York, in Jamaica, Queens. And I stayed there until I was about 3 or something. And I went with my grandparents to live in Wilmington, North Carolina. My grandparents decided to go back to Wilmington because Wilmington was their home. And because also they wanted to open up a small business. They had saved all their money hoping to go back to Wilmington, and they did go back, and they opened up a small business on the beach by the sea. They opened the business because at that time, Wilmington was completely segregated. Well, the South was just totally segregated. It was an apartheid. What that meant was that there were black schools. For example, I went to a all-black school, the Gregory School. There were the Black Library. You know, we grew up with that kind of reality of not voluntarily living like that, not voluntarily accepting apartheid, but understanding that the price of stepping out or standing up alone could possibly be death. Yeah. And from slavery, the idea of political prisoners started. We were political prisoners brought here from Africa. We were political prisoners in order to keep colonialism fat, in order to keep the plantation owners that profited from our sweat and labors we were kidnapped and brought here as prisoners, and our status hasn't changed, whether it's on the streets, we're prisoners of the ghettos, in Harlem, we're prisoners in small tenements, we're prisoners of urine smelling hallways. And I mean, I've always been a prisoner. I've never been free in my life. I don't know what freedom means. Sitting in this place on this plantation, you know, you think back to what those slaves had to deal with, and that probably the only beauty that they saw was the human beauty between them and the beauty of the sky and of the trees and of the grass. And I think that probably helped them to survive, to stay alive internally, spiritually. Growing up, you know, by the sea and seeing the beauty of this planet, it was hard not to really have a profound respect for this planet, for nature. My grandmother, she could not stand people throwing paper on the floor. I mean, she could not take that. That was a crime for her, because and then, you know, she would say, look at these grown people, you know, what's wrong with their hands? They can't hold the paper until they find a trash can, you know. I think that how we live in this earth is very much tied to how we think about nature. And so I think that it's important for African people and all people who appreciate living to make sure that our children and our grandchildren have a planet that is livable. And that means to make very serious changes in the order of the priorities and the politics that exist today.
Listen, Queen Mother Assata Shakur, I'm going to end it there. I want to thank everybody that joined me. I want to thank everybody in the chat. I'm Rollo, or Brother Rod, depending on how you know me. I want to thank everybody in the chat that chimed in. That's my salute to Queen Mother Assata Shakur, the F.A.C.T Project. Peace.